I'd like to talk about one of the heroes of the 1619 Project, W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, the 1619 Project is a kind of debunking project. It tries to debunk the American founders. It tries to make it seem they were all white men who were in some ways trying to protect slavery. And there are figures from Black history who appear little or nowhere in the 1619 Project. Frederick Douglass is virtually unmentioned. They hate Frederick Douglass. He was too pro-American. He was a Republican. He believed in the colorblind idea. And even Martin Luther King, who championed the colorblind ideal, even though King moved left in the latter part of his life, became a virtual socialist. Nevertheless, Martin Luther King is a bad guy as far as the 1619. They don't like the I have a dream speech at all. But they do like Du Bois. And it's worth looking at what it is about Du Bois that they like the best. Interestingly, I think what it is that they like best about Du Bois is not mentioned in the 1619 Project, but we'll get to that. So Du Bois was a sociologist, the first actually black sociologist to get a PhD from Harvard. He was a Northerner. He was an educated man, and he did some important work. He did a study of the so-called Negro family around 1905. He pointed out very importantly that the Negro family, the black family, had restored itself in the aftermath of slavery. There are many people today who trace the breakdown of the black family. Oh, it's due to slavery. Under slavery, people could sell off your kids and so on. Well, all that was true, but the simple fact is that many blacks, at great pains, reunited with their families, created a fairly stable family structure in the early part of the century, and Du Bois points this out in his important study, which was focused on Philadelphia. Du Bois is probably best known for his book, The Souls of Black Folk, where he makes a point that I think was true in his time, but is really not true today, and that is that blacks are caught in this kind of double identity, a dual tug. On the one hand, they are Americans. On the other hand, they are blacks. And these identities, according to Du Bois, are sort of in conflict. And I think this was a reasonable thing to say when you had a predominant white culture in which black culture, in a sense, was subordinated, was seen as defective, as inferior. And so someone who was in black culture and actually appreciated black culture felt that they were being ultimately rejected in mainstream society. And so hence this kind of feeling of two forces pulling you in opposite directions. But think about today and how different it is, because black culture dominates American culture. It, in fact, has shaped American culture in such a way that you have white guys who try to walk in the kind of black style or talk in the black style. And so you have whites imitating blacks far more than you have blacks imitating whites. And so this notion of a dual identity, which again, I think was a legitimate issue to talk about a century ago, I think has largely become antiquated now. But the point about Du Bois was that he was a radical, a socialist, someone who became very anti-American. This is, I think, the real reason that the 1619 people adore him. He was the founder of the NAACP, but the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, at that time was largely made up of whites. But over time, Du Bois became alienated from the NAACP. Even though he edited the magazine called The Crisis, they eventually grew tired of him. They pushed him out. He rejected them. And he gave up his U.S. citizenship toward the end of his life. He moved to, I believe, Ghana, and he died there at a very advanced age, I believe his early 1990s. Du Bois in 1937 visited Nazi Germany and came back full of praise for the Nazis. Now, the praise was qualified. I don't want to imply that Du Bois somehow became a Nazi, but he said nice things about Hitler. Think about that. He admired the efficiency of the Nazis. He even said that the anti-Semitism of the Nazis was in some way understandable under the circumstances. And what we see here from Du Bois is an affection that he had for socialist dictatorships. A kind of, I'm going to coin a word here, tyrannophilia that we see in Du Bois, not just in the case with Hitler, but listen to some things that Du Bois said about Stalin. I'm just going to read a few lines. This is from March 16, 1953. an article in the National Guardian. I'm only going to read a few lines, but it's full of this kind of stuff. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's the anti-Americanism of Du Bois and his praise for tyranny that I think is the secret of his appeal by the 1619 Project. Quote, Joseph Stalin was a great man. That's the first line. Joseph Stalin was a great man. Goes on to say, this was the highest proof of his greatness. He knew the common man, felt his problems, followed his faith. This is the Stalin who killed probably 3 to 4 times the number of Jews that Hitler killed in the Holocaust. He goes on, Stalin was a man who thought deeply, read understandingly, listened to wisdom. And then, to me, the worst line in the article, because it's an apology for mass murder, he says, quote, his kulaks, the kulaks are the farmers, the independent farmers, his kulaks clung tenaciously to capitalism, so says Du Bois, and were near wrecking the revolution when Stalin risked a second revolution and drove out the rural bloodsuckers. So basically what Du Bois is doing here, he's approving of the Soviet extermination. Well, there was a mass relocation, there was massive famine that followed that. Stalin destroyed the kulaks as a class of people. He didn't want these independent farmers. He wanted the farmers to be servants of the state. And so did Du Bois. Du Bois approved of the tyrannical system in which you don't have independent farmers, you don't have independent businessmen. You break their necks, you break their backs, you break their spirit, and you make them into supine subordinates of an all-powerful state. The 1619 Project wants to see something of that kind of state imported to America, and that's why W.E.B. Du Bois is one of their glorious heroes.